today for this webinar on strategies for sourcing and recruiting top supply chain talent. My name is Rodney Apple. I'm the president and founder of SCM Talent Group. Just some general housekeeping. We will be recording the webinar as well as the presentation, so we'll make this available hopefully in a few days. So if you need to come back and download the presentation, you can certainly do that. So with that being said, we're going to get started. I'm going to go through a lot of material today, and at the end we'll save time for some Q&A. All right, so just to give you a quick overview of my background, again, founder, president of SCM Talent Group. We're a national supply chain recruiting and executive search firm headquartered out of Asheville. I've been recruiting for over 20 years, and the last 15 to 16 I've been doing end-to-end supply chain recruitment. Personally filled over 1,000 professional to executive level supply chain positions, and I've spent about half my time both on the corporate side as well as in agency and executive search environments. I did spend about 10 years with the Coca-Cola Company leading their manufacturing and recruitment, manufacturing and supply chain recruitment for North America as well as their global support teams. Did the same thing for Home Depot, actually built out their first supply chain team back in 2002 and went on to lead nationwide recruitment for their logistics and supply chain organization. Did the same for Kimberly-Clark, Cummins, and HT Supply is another big client of ours as well. But I've also worked with a lot of medium-sized companies, startups. We've covered every aspect of supply chain in terms of the logistics, procurement, planning, manufacturing, at the plant level, regional, VP level, on up to the C level. And I've also touched on a lot of different industries in terms of product-centric companies, CPG, retail. I've done a lot in food and beverage, high tech, and so forth. So this experience has given me a really unique perspective, being on the inside, being on the outside, working with a lot of different industries in terms of how supply chain talent acquisition programs work. I've seen my fair share of the good, bad, and the ugly. And today I'm going to talk about various initiatives and strategies that companies can incorporate to help improve their talent attraction and acquisition programs and strategies. Also, on a side note, if you're with Apex, you may know this already, but I've been serving as their career coach since 2014. And we basically do these types of webinars on a quarterly basis, but the focus has been strictly on the career development employee side versus the employer side. So this new webinar series will focus more on talent acquisition and development, continuing to do the webinar series with Apex on the other side, the career development side. If we're not connected, I would encourage you to send over an email with a LinkedIn request. I'm also on Twitter under the SCM Talent tagline, and so feel free to shoot me an invite. Would love to connect with you and have you as a member of my network. So let's get into just talking about the supply chain talent problem. So there's a lot of research that's been conducted over the years. Deloitte did an extensive research on the supply chain talent gap. Here's some basic statistics that came out of that research. 71% of organizations are having difficulty finding senior leadership in the supply chain organizations. They're seeing about a 6-to-1 ratio of demand for professionals versus the supply. So that's a pretty high ratio. 38% of executives that lead supply chains have confidence in their supply chain organization's competency levels. And then forecasting out to 2025, they're predicting that of 60% of the job openings, only 20% of workers will be qualified. So what's driving the gap? It comes down to simple supply and demand. One of the largest generations, the baby boomers, are retiring in droves, and there's not enough talent that's coming in with new generations to close that gap. So that's one of the main problems. Over the years, I think supply chain has had an image problem when it comes to getting people excited about pursuing careers in supply chain. A lot of people have viewed supply chain over the years to, working on the dock, unloading trucks, driving trucks, and things like that. So there's a massive effort that's taking place across the supply chain spectrum, both on the university, academic side, as well as nonprofit side with supply chain associations. And of course, larger employers are doing everything they can to help close that gap as well with various outreach initiatives and so forth. And we're trying to get basically brand the supply chain as a solid career path, which we all know that it is. You've also got ongoing globalization, rapid advancements to technology with the cloud and big data and things like that. That's requiring some new skill sets that don't exist so much out in the workplace. And then I think on the employer side, companies may be relying upon, some traditional outdated strategies for how they go about attracting and recruiting candidates. And then we've also got some pretty widespread increases to wages throughout the supply chain. While this is great for candidates, it can create some headaches for employers that are, especially small, medium-sized companies that might not be able to afford the best talent that larger organizations, might be able to afford to go after. So all of these variables are coming into play, and like I said, there's a lot of macro-level solutions that are being discussed in all sectors of supply chain. But what's going to happen here is I think the problem is probably going to get a little bit worse before it gets better, and it's going to take some time for these larger initiatives to yield some results. So in the meantime, and this is the topic, the main core of today's webinar, what are some strategies and tactics that you can employ today or in the near term that can improve the way you go about recruiting supply chain talent? What I've seen throughout my career, again, I've seen some best-in-class programs, and I've seen some pretty bad programs when it comes to supply chain recruitment. I've seen inadequate, investments into the talent acquisition programs. I like to think of things in, people, process, systems. So on the people side, I've seen recruiters. I mean, I've been one myself where, you're loaded up with 30, 40, 50, 60 positions at a time, and maybe you can manage that in certain functions. I know, like in HR, you might have a handful of profiles. Finance, accounting, you've got a handful of profiles. They're typically located at the corporate office, so they're all in one location. But when it comes to supply chain, it makes it really difficult when all of these positions are different. There's different job titles. There's different job locations, different job levels, and so you're managing a pretty complicated group of requisitions compared to maybe your peers and that are doing recruitment in other areas. So that's one thing, and then it takes a while to develop the expertise in the supply chain sector because it is very complex. I think IT is another area that's complex, but supply chain certainly has its challenges there. When you do overburden your recruitment staff with too many requisitions or too much admin type work, they do become reactive, and then it turns into who's the squeaky wheel is the person that's going to get the grease. So, and I've been in that environment. It's not a great place to be in. It's a lot of stress, and so you have to get the people aspect right in terms of your resources. And then ultimately, hey, let's do more with less, and that never works out. It just causes for burnout. Then on the process side, I've seen some great processes, and then I've seen processes where a lot of things fall through the cracks due to too many touch points, too much administrative burden placed on recruiters. You're putting candidates through a poor experience on the interviewing side and so forth. And then on the system side, again, I've seen really good systems, and I've seen some horrific systems that just you have to click 1,000 times to get through screens, and every time you click, that's adding time to your day. So lack of the right tools and technologies, the resume is going into a black hole with no response. So those are problems that I've seen throughout my career. And then oftentimes recruiting can be viewed upon as hey, they're a necessary evil. We've got to have them. We've got to get positions filled. And then there are companies that treat recruiting as a core value-added strategy where everything's partnership-driven. You've got support from the CEO down, and a lot of effort goes into recruiting world-class talent. We've seen underutilization or just lack of basic things like employee referral programs, which tends to be a #1 resource for candidates. And then with employer branding, I've seen some really good websites, companies that do a great job. I think Coca-Cola, where I used to work, they've got a great employer branding program in place that's global. So you go over to Belgium's website, you'll see some different employer branding tactics. Same thing in the U.S., same thing in every other region. So they've got it down to local and regional levels. And then you've got companies that are still using poor job postings. They may have their career pages buried within their website, or you may not even see a career page at all unless you scroll down to the bottom to find something hidden in the navigation. That just kind of, that to candidates, that it's frustrating, and it also portrays a negative image that you may not treat talent or value talent like you should be. You've also got companies that tend to, be very strict when it comes to their requirements. Must have 10 years of this, 5 years of that, and they don't really look at the big picture and tend to, not open their mind to other places where they could get really good people, maybe from other industries and so forth. And then again, supply chain is very difficult, and people just tend to think of it, well, if you're recruiting supply chain, you're recruiting anything else. Recruiting's recruiting, and that's just not the truth. And then with compensation levels rising, some companies are not keeping up, and even lately we've experienced some clients that are just having a difficult time, meeting demands, in certain fields when it comes to compensation requirements. So that's creating some problems too. So you need to keep a good pulse on compensation and where it's heading, and make sure you have a solid program in place to attract candidates. So let's look at the people aspect. I think a good place to start, if you're having challenges finding people and you've got a time to fill that's, spanning 60, 90 days, you've got frustration with hiring managers, service levels are going down, customers are not happy, then it's probably time to conduct an assessment to kind of look at your end-to-end processes, your systems, look at the organizational structure, look at your talent, make sure you've got what's good, what are the gaps, and then try to develop some plans and corrective actions on how to close those gaps. If you've got somebody that internally that's really good with process mapping and evaluation, you may want to bring in that type of resource if there's someone in-house. But if not, you may want to try to go out and find somebody that does recruitment consulting in this area. And we've done that in the past in prior companies that I've worked for, and it's amazing when you start peeling back all the layers to find out, wow, there's a better way to do this, and so forth. From there, you want to start thinking about, okay, we know what we're good at, we know what we're bad at. Going forward, though, we need to push in the direction that gets us to great. And I think in supply chain recruitment, that's very important, just because of the talent gap that's going on. And so you've got to get really good at all of the fundamentals and then some. So, looking at people, again, making sure you've got the right people, the right number of them. You're setting your shop up to be proactive versus reactive. You've got all the right tasks allocated to the right people. On the process side, making sure we're streamlining the process. From my perspective, the less touch points, the less steps, the better. The more you have in there, the more room for things to fall through the cracks. And then on the system side, definitely want to take a look at your system. If it's prohibiting people to move quickly through the process, there's too many clicks, it's too cumbersome, then you probably want to look at another tool. And also make sure you've got the right sourcing tools and a heavy focus on direct sourcing, because posting and things like that just aren't getting the job done these days. It's also important to look at workforce planning. If you're a small company, obviously you kind of know in the top of the head, where you've been and where you're at, where you're trying to go. But mid-size, large companies, high-growth companies, you definitely need to get a handle on this, because this is really what drives everything you do when it comes to recruitment in terms of putting resources into place and so forth. What's the growth been like at the company? How many employees are we losing? What are some of our strategic hiring initiatives? Are we adding a department here? Or are we going to outsource this to another country or another company? Are we getting ready to acquire a company? And so forth. So you take all those variables into play. You want to find out why people are leaving to see if you can fix that problem as well. Understand, what the risks look like externally and internally. Do you have an aging workforce or folks getting ready to run out the door to retire on their golf courses? Look at all of those factors. If you're out in a rural area, you're the main employer in town. Is Amazon setting up shop in the near future, and they're going to take a lot of your employees? So you look at all those variables, and ultimately what we're trying to do is just to get a baseline on what hiring needs are going to look like, based on recent history, projections, and other internal and external variables. And then from there, you can use that data to help build out your structure and make sure you've got the right team in place in terms of staff, systems, tools, having a budget in place for advertising and things like that. And then you want to look at, well, if we get a baseline team in place, well, we may not want to scale it too high. We may want to have a lean team, and then you can supplement that team with search firm agencies. There might be a section like a call center that you want to outsource to RPO, which stands for Recruitment Process Outsourcing type companies, where they handle all the soup to nuts for recruitment services. I've definitely worked in that environment myself. And then maybe have some staffing companies that can help bring on contractors when needed. So looking at the organizational structure, I've worked in all kinds of different models before in my corporate time, and I've seen a lot, working with clients today in different industries. So by now you probably have an idea of what that structure needs to look like. There are a lot of different options I'd like to go through. Obviously, if you're a small, medium-sized, large employer, you're going to have different requirements and different needs. So So getting into the models, though, and I've seen probably 2 or 3 different models. If you're a small, medium-sized company, you've got ongoing hiring needs, sometimes you can get by with a full lifecycle recruital. This person's going to handle everything from soup to nuts, and it works great in the low volume hiring. Small, mid-sized companies. You get into a higher growth, a higher volume type of environment that you'll find in some of the larger companies. You're definitely going to maybe take a look at that approach, especially if you've got recruiters that might be having 20, 30 openings at any given time or more, like I've managed in the past. In that case, there's a hybrid model, and I've worked in this environment, and it is absolutely fantastic. You have your client-facing recruiters that are tightly integrated with the business. I've actually been asked to sit with the supply chain department before, and it was probably that happened at Home Depot, and SVP said, you need to move over here and sit with us. So I sat with a couple hundred people or so, and it was fantastic for accelerating my learning of the business and what's going on day to day. I was in their management meetings. We talked about staffing updates, helped drive the process, talk about candidate updates. We were able to move things along very quickly. And then you typically would have a sourcing partner that's aligned. I think this is extremely important in supply chain where it's a candidate-driven market, very tight labor market. You need someone that's going to be 100% focused on direct sourcing, on generating candidates, doing the research, doing the networking. These folks basically get the candidates into the pipeline. They get them interested. They get them semi-qualified. Are you in the money? Will you go to this location? Is this of interest? And once they get to that point, they flip it over to the recruiter. Recruiter does the full vetting and moves them through the process from there. And the last thing you want is to have your recruiter, doing all the interview scheduling, doing all the admin work, creating offer letters and editing those and editing postings and so forth. That really takes away a lot of the time they should be spending on the value-added activities that they're hired to do, such as sourcing and getting talent, quickly move through the process. So think of that as kind of a 3-pronged approach. We had that set up when I did a stint with PwC when they were rebuilding their supply chain advisory practice, and it was just a fantastic way to quickly recruit and get people quickly through the process, and that works well in certain environments. And again, certain environments that are smaller in terms of hiring volume, you may want to have that one full lifecycle recruiter. Again, workload management, this is a leadership thing. The leader of talent acquisition, needs to make sure they don't overburden recruiters. You want them to have the right amount of recs, what that number needs to look like. You can't throw a number at it. It just depends on the complexity of the positions, the challenge of the positions, the locations. If they're in the middle of nowhere, that's going to take more time to find candidates and so forth. So all those variables need to come into play if you're a talent acquisition leader when you're assigning requisitions and determine what kind of resources you need to efficiently get positions filled. And again, never overload a recruiter. And I say that because I've had 60+ positions before, and it makes things very miserable, and that's what creates a lot of frustration level within the company when they can't get positions filled on time, and the blame always points back to the recruiter in the department. So that's one way to just paint a negative image of recruitment. So you want to make sure you've got a good balanced team in place. Feel free to supplement that with contract recruiters and so forth. And on that note, determining the number of full-time recruiters. You want to create a proactive shop where you can go out and aggressively recruit and source talent, versus spending a few minutes here or having to wade through hundreds of applications. You kind of want to stay out front. Again, supplement when needed. Make sure you've got a plan B in place. It's nice to have good partners in case you've got a challenging position, challenging location, it makes more sense to outsource it. So bear that in mind as well. And then looking at when you're hiring people, and again, I think there's wide degrees of recruiting talent. I've worked with folks that they're going to sit there and they're going to review every resume that comes into the posting. They're not going to go out and look for candidates. So what are you going to get? You might get lucky here and there, but for the most part, you're not really tapping into the larger candidate pool, folks that are happy or semi-happy, in their current situation. They're not even thinking about looking at postings. Those are the kind of people you want to proactively go after. So make sure you're getting a really strong person that has a solid fundamentals when it comes to recruiting and sourcing. They're fairly aggressive. They got the right customer service, follow through, all the traits we look for in a good recruiter. But on the supply chain side, if it were me, I would definitely strive to get somebody that's got a solid foundation in supply chain recruitment. Now, obviously, if you're a 3PL, you probably would want somebody that's got a lot of logistics experience. Maybe it could be different if you're in a management consulting environment. So when I say supply chain, just make sure the person's got knowledge base and obviously, and ideally, some connections and a strong network. Within that space that you operate in, they can tap into their network to generate referrals. They're going to gain immediate respect and confidence levels when they can talk the supply chain lingo, talk shop with with business leaders and hiring managers. And I think overall it really helps to better assess candidates when you have a good foundation in supply chain. That in turn can improve your time to fill and get people moved through the process, ultimately finding great talent and getting them hired as quickly as possible. Big fan of ongoing learning. We do that internally here, and I've definitely done that when I worked on the corporate side. But everything from attending recruiting workshops, conferences, sending your team off. Send one person off to a conference. I know they can get expensive, and let that person come back and share their learnings with the team. Making sure you're staying out front in terms of trends. What companies are downsizing. I use a tool called Feedly. It's feedly.com. It's a news aggregator and fantastic way to stay abreast of supply chain trends, employers that are hiring, employees that are downsizing, and you can also pull in all of the blogs related to supply chain. I've got a categorized section for blogs that come in for recruiting and sourcing best practices as well, like ERE, for example. And that really helps us to kind of stay abreast of cutting edge, recruitment tools and methodologies. As technology is changing by the day, it seems. So there's a lot of things you can tap into on that end to help with your sourcing efforts. And then just making sure you're promoting these practices amongst the team. I'm a big fan of having a site like SharePoint where you can contribute and easily collaborate with your team in terms of tips and tools and things like that. So we talked about people. Let's kind of look into the process. You know, recruiting is not really, it's not rocket science, but, you know, I've definitely have seen my fair share of good processes, and over the years, over my 20 years and over my 15 years in supply chain recruiting, you know, we are continuously working on trying to improve our process, improve our customer service levels, improve the quality of candidates, and ultimately just do a better job of servicing our customers. And so I'm going to kind of take this step by step, and I think, you know, one of the most critical steps in the process, and I see a lot of recruiters get this wrong, is the intake or discovery process, basically what you do when you kick off a new search. And if you don't get this right, I've seen this lead to poor results, having to start the search over time and time again. But basically, it's ensuring you have 100% alignment between the recruiter and the hiring team. You've got all the data you need to assess and market candidates. You've got understanding of what success looks like in the role. You've got all the data you need to answer questions from candidates, so you don't have to go bug the manager over and over. You've got a game plan for your sourcing strategy. You can you know, nail down timelines and how you're going to report back, what the interview process looks like. Maybe you've got a time frame in mind for when you want to conduct interviews. All of that information is critical, and I'm going to show you kind of what we do on our end with our process. And I'm not saying ours is the best, but it absolutely works wonders for us in terms of delivering quality candidates, you know, time and time again on the first time around. And then on the candidate assessment and interviewing process, we take all of that detail from the intake. We map that core criteria into our phone screening assessment form. I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute. And basically it ensures, you know, we're not just asking standard cookie cutter questions for every single candidate that comes in. For every search, we've got a different set of questions, and it all leads back to what that hiring manager is looking for, what's most important. So we customize that form, again, looking at, you know, competencies, leadership, technical, functional. We're always assessing past performance against the key deliverables that are looked for in the position, making sure they fit in from a size, scope, scale, complexity perspective, you know, motivational fit, cultural fit, all of those things. So we take that to assess candidates, and then the third piece of this process here is we take the same criteria that we got from the hiring manager to define the position, to assess candidates, and then on the back end, we use that criteria to validate that the candidate indeed you know, has done what they've said they did during the phone interview. So let's take a look at this. Here's the intake process. Up top, you'll see we get some very basic information. We really like to understand why the job's open, how long has it been open, what have you done so far to fill it. I've gotten searches that have had a birthday before, you know, approaching a year old, and so that's a red flag, and you always want to kind of dive in and understand what's, you know, what the issue is. And then we start with the company. We start broadly, and we funnel down into the organization and supply chain, as well as down to the position. So we want to gain an understanding of, you know, product services, the history, who your customers are, where they're located, your business divisions, your key competitors, what's the culture like, that's always very important, and so forth. And then we go down into the supply chain organization. Now, this is always going to vary. If it's a warehouse position, we kind of look at the logistics network. You know, if it's a higher level up position, then we're going to kind of go through the whole end-to-end supply chain. So this is always going to be, these are the questions, though, that we like to go through, understanding the footprint, what's the structure of the departments, how's it broken out, you know, or you have any outsourced providers, you know, if it's a procurement position, a position over P&L, you know, what do the budgets and operating spends look like, and then, you know, what's your supplier base look like, what kind of technologies do you have in place, what are the top challenges, objectives, and those kind of things. And then we dive down into position, you know, real important question, what kind of deliverables do you want this person to achieve in year 1, year 2, who are they going to work with internally, externally, reporting structure, KPIs, ideal characteristics, we want to understand the growth opportunity, what's the key selling messages, obviously get down into compensation, what's the interview process, and so forth. From there, we've kind of built a really robust profile. We've got a copy of the job description. We're always going to validate that that job description aligns with what the hiring manager just told us, and then we're going to get into developing our sourcing strategy while we have the manager on the phone. What kind of industries are you open to? Can you rank those? What kind of companies would you like for us to target? What kind of companies do we need to refrain from? Are there any referrals you have that you'd like for us to tap into? And then from there, we basically develop our process for how we're going to work together. When do you want this person to start? Everybody says yesterday, but we try to get some realistic expectations around that. We get into how we're going to report to who, ideal start date, hiring decision date, and then miscellaneous notes from there. Same thing with our phone screen template. I'm not going to walk you through all of this, but we basically take the criteria, we map it over to here. We're asking the basic questions, of course. Will you relocate? Why are you looking to make a move? And so forth. And then we continue going down our list of functional competencies. We'll basically, write it. We'll type in what that needs to look like based on the intake. Go down to our technical, systems, analytical type competencies, leadership, managerial competencies, and so forth. And then that third piece of the process, the third leg of the stool, is the reference check. Again, we take the same criteria. We're asking the references, to validate and vouch for the experience and criteria that we're looking for. Moving along and kind of optimizing the process, we've also got, now that we've got our process in place for how we're going to kick off a search, assess candidates, validate candidates, and I've kind of moved on here to really, the offer phase, because we've seen a lot of issues lately with companies just really missing the ball here with how they approach compensation negotiations. So it's just critical for the recruiter to dive in and understand the person's, current comp packages. Do they have a non-compete? We've had a couple of issues pop up recently with non-competes that have caused some major headaches, so you want to understand that. Their expectations. You want to, making sure you're staying in constant communication with the candidate pre-closing, understanding what other offers they might have coming in. You want to also understand on the other side of that coin, what are the hiring manager's limitations. If they're unrealistic, you definitely need to push back. And then from there, develop, if this doesn't go through, what's our backup plan, making sure you understand how you're going to address a counteroffer and so forth. We've had some clients recently that have kind of gone in with, there's two approaches to making offers. You can kind of go in low and hope you get the person and maybe save some wiggle room to go up. And that has been just a negative tactic lately in a highly candidate-driven marketplace. It's not a good approach. We've lost candidates that we spent a lot of time on because employers refuse to go in with their best foot forward. So you can't afford to do this, especially when somebody's got 2 or 3 different offers. So very important to go in with the best foot, but also have a plan B. Let's see. Finding creative tactics. If you can't get there in compensation off the bat, can't do a sign-on bonus, hey, maybe we can do a 6-month review. So always try to find some creative ways that may not be compensation related. It could be extra vacation, time off, things like that might seal the deal. And then from there, obviously move towards acceptance. I'm not going to get into onboarding, transitioning. It's really more on the HR side, but as recruiters, it is our job to periodically follow up with new hires and with our hiring managers to make sure everything's going well and to address any concerns proactively. Big fan of continuous improvement. You need to be measuring things. If you don't measure, you can't make improvements. So, always focus on what can we do to improve our quality of hire, our candidate experience, time to fill, and so forth. Using a type of survey method to solicit feedback, use that data to help improve. I've actually, when I was at Coke, we had a pretty big OE team. I actually supported those guys, and we got them to come over and do some use some lean tools to kind of dive down into our process to help make some improvements. So if you've got that resource, maybe they're over in the manufacturing or supply chain side, bring them into recruiting and see if they can kind of help and assess and make some recommendations on how to improve your quality and remove waste and things like that in your process. Big fan of going out to workshops and webinars, so you continue doing that and then promote the sharing of best practices as well. On the system side, not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but again, when you look at your recruitment systems, we've been on 2, let's see, in the last 4 or 5 years, and we're looking to go ahead and move to another system. So we're always evaluating what is the best system out there for our particular needs and so forth. Making sure we invest into the right tools and technology. Again, if you're clicking around, a lot of data admin, it's just going to drive recruiters crazy. So try to find a system that's very streamlined around your process. You should be able to quickly, conduct searches and source and engage, out of your database. It should not be difficult. Should not be too many clicks. So that's critical, especially when you're moving so quickly, managing multiple positions. Time, every second counts. You need to have good reporting capabilities. The system we're on now is pretty horrific, and so we're unable to really track things through the system. We've got to do it through Excel, and it's driving us crazy, so that's a reason why we're moving. Omni-platform, meaning it works on all types of devices. That's important. EEOC, all that stuff's important to maintain compliance. Solid online training, so you don't have to have somebody that sits out there every time you hire someone to train them on the system. And I think this is critical, making sure it integrates with your social media channels, easily pop a position out to your career site. If you have a job board, you want it to just click a button, pop it out there. And I think the holy grail is if you can have an employee referral program integrated that you can push positions out to, let's say, a distribution list, and then those employees kick it out to their social media sites. And there are all tools out there that do that. I think that would be a fantastic way to kind of generate some leads through the system. And then just making sure it's integrated. SMS, text messaging is becoming more important, when you're recruiting millennials. And then I would say, you want to automate routine steps in the process around scheduling, communications, and so forth. Same thing with recruiting tools. A big fan of SharePoint or having some other kind of collaborative site that the team can tap into. They're constantly loading it with different sourcing tools and websites and things like that. So everybody's sharing best practices. It's super easy to do that, and we've done that in past employers as well. LinkedIn Recruiter we're huge fans of. It's not cheap, but it's certainly worth the investment, and we maintain a license for each of our recruiters. If you can't do that, then at least get the next package down, the Recruiter Lite. Job boards, not a big fan. We don't really use them other than our posting package to LinkedIn. So you really need to determine your particular needs. Does it make sense to partner with a company like CareerBuilder or Indeed? They certainly work in certain areas, but for what we do, we're not seeing the results, so we're not spending any investment there. And then I like to think of recruiters as we're marketers. We're salespeople, we're marketers. So you always need to put on your marketing cap. What are marketing people doing? On the B2B, B2C side, what kind of techniques are they using? So we follow a lot of, I would say, software companies that are really good in that space, just to try to learn some new tactics to help drive our business. And then sometimes it helps to have a mentor or a coach to bring in on occasion, help train your team. There are some really good people out there that are wizards when it comes to sourcing, and so we're always trying to tap into them to find out what the greatest and latest tools and technology look like. And then just kind of, we've talked about people, we've talked about the process, talked about systems and tools, kind of getting into sourcing tips and some things that work best for us. I think you have to think creatively these days. I think you have to think way outside of the box. There's so much ambiguity that you face in supply chain with different job titles and different industries, and it can get downright crazy and frustrating. So, you have to maintain that critical thinking when you look at sourcing. But obviously college recruiting programs, I've seen some companies have some tremendous success in this area. And it's just important to find out what are the right universities. It could be based on where are they located. It could be based on the types of programs that they might be known for. But make sure you've got that right, the right universities you can tap into. Be proactive. Get out there before the competitors. Build the relationships with the professors, with the career and alumni placement teams. I've had a tremendous amount of success doing that over the years, especially with junior and analyst planner level positions. Career branding is huge these days. You got so many awesome marketing techniques out there on the digital side, and so you need to take advantage of those. So we invest a whole lot of time and effort into search engine optimization and trying to attract candidates to our website and get them into our pipeline, so to speak. So making sure you've got a good career page, super easy to find, not at the bottom of the page. All large employers should have this in place by now, and sometimes I've seen a big trend in creating separate career websites for some of these large employers that are just so huge they need to have it. I would say bring in your marketing person too, and they're, tell them what you're trying to achieve, what tools are out there when it comes to inbound and outbound marketing tactics, and then making sure you incorporate those in, and then having consistent branding across all of your different channels, whether it be the website, your job postings, etc. You want the same look and feel. It looks very professional. And then from there, if you're a large employer doing a lot of hiring, it might make sense to have somebody that really manages that social media. You can get out of control when you've got so many openings, so many people engaging with your brand. You don't want to leave them out there hanging, waiting for an answer. Job descriptions, it just amazes me to this day. Companies continue to use the old-fashioned, let's load this thing up with skills, and then candidates look at it and say, I have no idea what this job does. I see that you want 10 years of this, 5 years of that, 8 years of that, and so on, and it just deters candidates. So our recommendation, and this has worked wonders for us, is really to kind of paint a good overview of the company, have a good boilerplate in place, making sure you're incorporating storytelling and your unique value proposition. Do not use the same profile across every department within supply chain. Guilty of that. When I was working with some large companies, that's just the way they did it because nobody had time to tailor. But if you can tailor and customize at least to a degree, I think that generates a lot more excitement when candidates take a look at it. And they do take a look at it and read through it, especially when you're direct sourcing. So you want to have a good job postings in place. Even with our own job postings lately, we've been incorporating images. We've put video into our job descriptions, again, making sure we've got the brand consistency, and that's done a lot of wonders for getting candidates excited, especially with, Asheville, we're a small town. Everybody has heard of Asheville, Beer City, but we've got a video that we've embedded, the kind of real nice mountain landscape overview of things to do, and it really has helped generate some excitement. We also provide links too where candidates can quickly access the job location data. We use this a lot in rural areas where people may not be familiar with what to do in the school system, so we just make it easy for candidates to click and hopefully get excited about the location. And then we're also leveraging our sidebar content on our websites, putting in pertinent data when it comes to career articles and tips and videos and things like that, and I think that's a great tactic to engage as well. I've been part of developing supply chain leadership development programs, dating back to my Home Depot days in the early 2000s, and I've seen tremendous success in these programs. When we first kicked that off back in the day, we kind of had to learn through trial and error, and we made some errors and mistakes. So, but it can be a fantastic way to attract entry-level, junior-level talent. You get these folks rotated into core functions. You tend to be able to get people at that top echelon when you can get them through these types of programs because people want to accelerate their learning and get different exposures in different areas. I don't think there's a quicker way to do it than to go through an LDP program. You're going to get that loyalty when you invest that amount of time into that employee. It's going to improve your retention rates. I think equally as important, you're going to strengthen your talent bench, and you're going to improve your ability to promote from within. So this is a fairly low-cost technique. A lot of companies have done it. GE is famous for doing it across a lot of their business functions. I think the key to success, and what we learned before when we made some mistakes, is having somebody that is dedicated to leading the program, especially if you've got several people that are in it. You want to make sure somebody's driving the right initiatives and checking in. Great to have a mentor assigned to each person. I think that's critical, especially if you can get a senior level person. Making sure you've got objectives and goals in place, of course, plenty of training, and then the consistent feedback is critical, especially when folks are rotating out with different businesses. They got a new set of strangers every 6 months. You want to make sure you're engaging and getting feedback. Again, GE is a great company. A lot of other companies are doing great work in this space. I encourage you to check them out to try to get some best practices. Big fan of networking. That means externally, not just internally through LinkedIn, but getting out and about. So we go to the Apex chapter meetings, the global conference every year. It's a great place. As an employer, you may want to consider sponsoring some events. That's a great way to get your name out there. We actually use the online membership directory sometimes to help with identifying candidates to reach out to. You can search by keyword and title, so that's been very effective. I don't think a lot of people know about that. And you may not be supposed to be using that for that purpose. I think there's a disclaimer, but we keep it in check. We don't, blow it up or anything. Just be careful with tools like that. And then, going out to their conferences, fantastic way to generate leads as well. Veteran recruiting programs are very effective in supply chain. Amazon has hired a ton of people through that effort, and when you've got so many operations positions, there's a lot of people in the military running operations, and it's just a good natural fit, great place for them to transition into the workforce. Again, employee referral programs, this is absolutely critical, I think, for every organization, especially when you've got a fair amount of hiring that goes on. So try to make this your #1 goal and source for hires. You absolutely need that top-down sponsorship to generate excitement and to get, to let people know, hey, the CEO is closely watching this. You get your HR business partners and supply chain recruiters to help drive the process. I was a big fan, in my days of corporate recruiting, of just walking the halls especially when I beat my head up against the wall, I couldn't find candidates. I'd go out and just walk door to door and try to solicit referrals. Who do you know? Who do you know at this company? And it was a very effective way of getting of leads. And then, make sure you're leveraging your company's internal communication channels to promote the program and your positions. You're getting active participation with people that are pushing out jobs and things to their personal networks. That can drive a lot of great results. Putting in an incentive plan, hey, we're going to give you a trip to the Bahamas, whoever gets the most hires in a year, things like that. And then trying to automate this too, because it can be a very cumbersome program to run. And luckily there are some tools like JobVite and Zalp that have come into play in the last few years to help automate this process. So if you don't have a good tool in place or a good system, I would absolutely encourage you to check that out. Yeah, and then how we go about engaging potential candidates, and I'm going to kind of go through this because we're running out of time. I want to save time for some questions, but we deploy an omni-channel approach to our sourcing. We develop a tailored strategy every single time. We've got multiple touch points in terms of how we engage and reach out to candidates, whether they're through our database or through LinkedIn. We consistently try to follow up without being a stalker. We're trying to get connections to people, referrals. That's what it's all about, networking. And always focused, always on trying to grow our network, provide value to our network. It's never about me. It's all about what kind of value can you contribute, because the more you give when it comes to networking, what we found is the more you receive. So always be going in with the mindset of how can I help this individual before you think about what can they do for me. Can you give me a referral? If you go with that approach, you may not have the best success. When you go in with the candidate in mind, how can I help that person, then you'll have a lot better luck, is what we have found. Customize your messages. Don't use cookie cutter templates. Try to pick out something in their profile that's unique. Address that in your message. Aim to start a dialogue. You don't need to lay out every single thing about the company and job. Try to get that person on the phone is the ultimate goal, and then move them forward from there. Same thing, with LinkedIn. We pipeline people into folders. We get them into distribution list. We're trying to find a better tool for that right now. That's why we're moving away from our current ATS. And then making sure you're saving searches in LinkedIn so you can just have some automated candidates coming to you that fit the criteria that you frequently recruit for. Make sure you're talking to highly placeable candidates that fit in with your most common profiles, and keeping in touch with those kind of folks. We don't just use InMail with LinkedIn. Make sure you're fully using the whole platform with LinkedIn groups and things like that. And sometimes we check out the sidebar. I know a lot of recruiters do that. That's a great place when you hit that brick wall. And then just general things like, make sure you respond to messages in a timely manner. I know it's hard to keep up with, but it's very important to maintain reputation. And then try to contribute a lot of good value-added content. Create it if you have time. I know it's hard to do that as recruiters, but you want to be sharing, and you want to try to elevate your personal brand as a supply chain recruiter, and stay out and about on the network so people will tend to come to you and view you as an expert within your domain. So with that being said, we're down to Q&A, and I think we've got some time to take some questions. Katie can check into our system here. Okay, here we go. We've got what functional areas or positions are the most difficult to find talent for these days? And that's a very good question, and I think this seems to change quite a bit. But I would say, in general, we tend to have the most difficulty, believe it or not, with filling positions at that lower level, analysts, let's say planners, engineers, network modelers. It doesn't matter what the function is; those people seem to be the most difficult. My theory is that hey, you're out of college, you've got a job, your head is down, you're soaking things in like a sponge. And so you're not really thinking about where do I go next externally. You're hoping to just get promoted and move up into management and things like that. So you really have to engage people at that level and network your butt off when it comes to filling those junior level positions. I think we're doing okay when it comes to mid-level positions, and then senior level positions. While those folks are the easiest to identify, you still have to have a really good approach to engaging them because they're getting so many calls from people trying to sell them stuff, vendors and suppliers and companies selling freight, brokering freight and things like that. So it's all about persistence and follow-up, but those are truly the most difficult positions that we recruit for these days. Let's see, when developing a sourcing strategy, how do you determine where to start or begin with sourcing? So that's a great question. Again, our approach is always tailored, and it's always driven in collaboration with the hiring managers. We want to have their input. We're going to use our depth of experience and make some suggestions as well. But typically, we tend to start with our our resume database that we've been building for a number of years, and we start there. We've made a number of hires out of that. It's a great place to network. Obviously, you've got people's phone numbers, email, so we always start there, and that's why sometimes I'll tell candidates, hey, it's very important for you as a candidate, if you want to get some extra attention, make sure, everybody hates applying online, but make sure you've got your resume submitted to the right types of recruiters, and especially with companies that you're targeting. Just having your resume sitting in that database can do wonders, because when I was on the corporate side, the first place we would always look would be in our database. So if you're not in there, then you're never going to be found. So I think it's important to do that, because you never know what can if you're going to get pulled up in a search. And then from there, we move into different channels. LinkedIn, we've made a tremendous amount of placements through LinkedIn, so that's always a top channel. We've got Salesforce.com. We've got some tools integrated through third-party tools through Salesforce that we use to help identify and research candidates. So we basically have what I call just that omni-channel approach. We tap into every channel that we can possibly tap into when it comes to finding talent. And then having a network, and that's why it's important to do networking, especially when you start out in recruiting and to continue doing it. I got a search for a VP of supply chain the other day, and the first thing I did, I just immediately thought of several people, made some phone calls, and within probably an hour or two, I had 7 or 8 referrals to continue to source. So having that network in place takes a lot of time, but if you do it daily, just a little bit, a few minutes here and there, you'll have a pretty ridiculous network to tap into, and I've been building mine for 16 years in supply chain, so that's definitely given us a competitive advantage. Okay, we got time for a couple more questions. What are the top traits of a great supply chain recruiter? We kind of touched on that a little bit, but from my perspective, having the fundamentals is critical. You have to be able to do the research component. You have to think like a private investigator. You have to you have to understand how to engage. Your communication needs to be sound when it comes to your written communication, when it comes to your verbal communication as well. You have to understand the complexities of supply chain when it comes to the different functional areas. You have to be a critical thinker when it comes to understanding, well, Target calls these warehouse people leaders group leaders. Walmart calls them operations leaders. So you need to be able to figure out what kind of job titles people are using in different companies. Because if you want to use the same search string over and over, you're probably going to miss out on a lot of good people. I think companies over the years are purposely calling people different things to try to keep the recruiters from poaching. So that's important. I think the client side, being able to engage with, I would say, candidates and hiring managers, being able to articulate that you understand supply chain, be able to ask the right questions, and ultimately be able to build out that profile. Again, it's so critical to do that in the intake process because that drives everything going forward. And if you're not asking the right questions, you're not getting the right profile in place, you're going to struggle with delivering the right candidates. So I think that's what makes a good recruiter. See, what are your thoughts on blogging and using content marketing tactics to attract talent? And blogging is something, we've had a blog for several years now, and I'll tell a story. While you're doing it, it may seem like, okay, this is a waste of time. I'm not getting any tangible results. But I got a search from one of the nonprofits in supply chain, and they wanted a executive leader to run an organization they had just acquired. And it's very niched field. Not a lot of people out there do this stuff. So I'm like, I'm going to go out and look in our database, and I'm also going to contact influencers, that work in supply chain, people that write the blogs, and network with those kind of folks because it was one of those types of positions. And I looked in my database, and I had a cover letter from a guy that said, hey, I saw your blog post on top 6 tips for how to optimize a supply chain resume. I structured my resume around those tips. Very good advice, and I wanted to show it to you. I found that person's resume, and lo and behold, he's got the dream candidate for this role that I had with this nonprofit. So I immediately called him, and long story short, he worked out to be the candidate. It was an executive placement. It was a great fee. And that came from someone finding me on the internet through a blog post that I had written years ago. So you have to look at it from the point of the vantage point of, I'm doing this work, I'm creating good content, creating good advice. People are going to look at you like, okay, this guy has some good knowledge to share. I want to be associated with him or his firm, and I want my resume to be in his database. And that's exactly what happened. So absolutely, blogging and content marketing can absolutely drive some results if you do it effectively. And we've got time for one more question. So what challenges do you foresee in supply chain recruitment over the next few years? That's a great question. I actually had a conversation with one of the leading supply chain blog editors yesterday on that exact topic, and he was making his predictions for going over his predictions that he made earlier this year. A lot of those folks do those annual predictions, and we got into a lot of good conversation there. And a lot of it was around just employers. I mean, they're not going to have any choice when you face this type of scarcity. You've got to get creative, and if you're going to continue to assist upon, we're going to have these skills, this profile. You're not going to have any flexibility. You're just going to tend to struggle with recruiting, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. So we talked about how some employers are getting really flexible, and I remember I've had a couple of searches recently, and I've had several folks that I've recruited before that have gone out to Amazon, and I'm just looking at the things they're doing, and I'm like, wait a minute, you're in food manufacturing, and you've been hired to design a new logistics network for Amazon. I mean, that has nothing to do with what you did over at this food and beverage company. And I was just kind of shocked, and I started peeling back, looking at other people, just out of curiosity, and I was finding that, wow, Amazon, they're just going after top talent. I'm sure they've exhausted looking for those perfect profiles, and they're starting to look for great talent, people that have aptitude, people that have abilities to do whatever they're asked to do. They're just smart people, and they've got drive, and they're going to get it done. And I've seen that approach by other companies as well. So I think what we're seeing is companies are going to start being a little bit more flexible, look at people from different industries. Obviously, cultivating from within is really what you want to try to do. But at the end of the day, if you can't do that, you have to go out and direct source. You have to go out and recruit. You have to go out and poach talent. So I think we're just going to see more, let's call it the war for talent over the years. And I'm just hoping that these tips and advice that I've covered around what I think great looks like will help you out with your efforts in supply chain recruitment. So with that said, thank you for your time.